Good morning, sir. Good morning, Sir Garrick. Hileman. Can you hear me?
Hello, sir. Very good morning. Garrick, Mr. Garrick Hileman. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
very,
Yes,
very
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
good evening to you, sir.
Good evening. Good morning.
Here, here we are in the morning.
Excellent.
So,
Let me
shall we
start
check
my-
the presentation, sir?
Yes.
Whether it, okay.
Let me,
Just share
Okay.
your screen, sir.
great. I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, it's visible, but your presentation.
Let's hold on 1 second. Okay.
It's visible.
Okay. Can you see
Yeah,
the
it's visible.
presentation?
It's visible.
Okay. Excellent. And you can hear me okay?
Yes,
sir.
yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm excited to get started whenever you're ready.
Yeah, we'll start in 2 minutes, sir. 9 o'clock.
Okay. Great.
Good morning, everyone. HOD ma'am, shall we start the session?
Yes, Lokeshwari, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Every brilliant experiment starts with an act of imagination. John Lehrer. I welcome you all for the third day of International Conference on Computational Intelligence and Data Science, ICC IDS 2021. So we'll start with the keynote talk by Dr. Garrick Hileman, Head of Research at blockchain.com and visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. Topic of the session is cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, past, present, and future. Now I would request our conference chair, Dr. R. Kanchana, to introduce about keynote speaker.
Thank you, Lokeshwari. Good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Garrick Hileman. I'm very thankful to him for having accepted our invitation and deliver a keynote talk in our conference ICC IDS 2021. Dr. Garrick Hileman is the head of research in blockchain.com and visiting fellow at the London School of Economics. He completed his PhD in economics history at the London School of Economics. He is best known for his research on monetary and distributed systems innovation, particularly cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. He is ranked as one of the 100 most influential economists in UK and Ireland. He is a regularly invited speaker to various private and public sector institutions, including the CIA, US Army and Naval War Colleges, Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of International Settlements, and Financial Stability Board. Garrick is also frequently asked to share his research and perspective with the media, including CNBC, BBC, etc. Notable cryptocurrency and blockchain research publications of him include Global Cryptocurrency Benchmarking Study and Global Blockchain Benchmarking Study, both at University of Cambridge. He has also created and published a coin desk, State of Bitcoin and State of Blockchain reports from 2013 to 16. Garrick's other research interests include sovereign debt, financial crisis, financial repression and prudential regulation, black markets, and systemic risk. Garrick's teaching includes developing the UK's first university taught class on blockchain technology at the University of Cambridge and teaching on numerous executive education programs and classes for Cambridge, Oxford, Columbia, Northwestern, Imperial College of London, and London School of Economics. And Garrick has worked for more than 20 years in a private sector with both startups like blockchain.com and established companies such as Bank of America, the Home Department, IDG, and Alliance. Garrick's technology experience includes co-founding a San Francisco-based new venture incubator and IT strategy consulting for multinationals. Garrick has served on the boards of directors of both publicly traded and private companies, and he has worked or consulted in a wide range of industries, including banking, technology, online media, insurance, business service, retail, non-profit, education, and government. Sir, we are really honored to have your talk in our conference. I request you to deliver the keynote talk.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for the very kind introduction. It is a real pleasure to be speaking with you here virtually, and I hope one day in person. I've spent quite a bit of time in recent years talking with journalists in India and talking about the Indian marketplace and its regulatory approach to crypto assets and blockchain technology. Yet I've never actually been to India, so I'm hoping someday to receive an invitation to come visit in person, and it'd be lovely to meet some of you at that time. So the title of this lecture is Cryptocurrency and Blockchain Technology, Past, Present, and Future. And because I don't know how familiar this audience is with the topic of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, I wanted to try to cover a spectrum of the history and a little bit of the basics around how the technology works, as well as try to give you my thoughts on where this is all going. And I would love for us over the next hour to, if we can, I don't know if the organizers can allow this, but for me to take questions, if possible, if anyone wants to add anything, I think that would be very interesting. And as I'm sure many people listening right now know, this is a very important and timely topic for India. There is currently discussion again in India of heavily regulating or even banning cryptocurrencies. It, I think, is more nuanced in terms of what type of policy we'll expect to see from India than that. I think it's not going to be a black and white ban from my understanding. But it's, I think, important for India to become more educated about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, and hopefully today's lecture can help contribute something to that education. But I'd love your questions and comments as we go through this, if you'd like to provide those. So we already had a very generous introduction. I'm not going to say anything more than was already said, other than I've been working on researching blockchain technology since 2011. When I first learned about it during my PhD at the London School of Economics. I had been working in Silicon Valley before that as was mentioned, on tech and finance. And I was very fortunate to be doing a PhD under Neil Ferguson, a great financial historian. And the combination of my technology background with my studies in economics and history at that time, I think really helped me to, more so than my economics peers, many of whom lack kind of much experience working in technology. It helped me to understand the potential implications of this technology, I think, earlier than many other academic economists. So today what we're going to cover is 5 things. First, we're going to start off with a little bit of history. Who invented blockchain technology and what hard problem in computer science did it solve? Then second, we're going to, as I mentioned, kind of look a little bit at the mechanics, or under the bonnet, as we say in the UK, at how the machine works. Third, we're going to talk beyond Bitcoin. The first 2 sections will focus to some degree on Bitcoin. It's the largest and most successful implementation of blockchain technology, but there's many other things happening with blockchain technology besides Bitcoin. And in section 4, we'll look at one such example, a case study of a distributed ledger technology pilot program in the UK in the food supply chain. And I was hired by the UK government to provide an independent assessment of those pilot DLT, distributed ledger technology. It's another term for blockchain programs. And I want to share with you some of the things I concluded from my review of that pilot program. And then we'll wrap up with some thoughts on where this is all going. And I'll try to keep an eye, I guess, on the questions as they come in. Looks like in the chat.
Sir, excuse me, sir, whether you are on the first slide or the slide is not changed actually.
Oh, interesting. Is it changed now?
No.
No. Okay,
No,
let me
sir.
switch. Is it changed now?
No.
No.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Let me escape and try.
So close your screen sharing. So close your screen sharing. Once again, you start it, sir.
Yeah,
Close your
okay.
screen sharing and then
Zoom sharing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, yes.
No, yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Here's the agenda I just discussed. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, excellent. I'll keep the chat box open too. So if you have questions along the way or comments, yeah, feel free to speak up. You don't even need to use the chat box. Just interrupt me. Okay. So who invented blockchain technology and what hard problem did it solve? So the story of blockchain technology really begins, I guess 40 years ago almost now. There's 2 parts to this story. Bitcoin was invented 12 years ago, but blockchain technology really started, 40 years ago or so. And a group that I think deserves a lot of the credit for cryptocurrency and blockchain technology is this group called the cypherpunks. This is an artist's depiction of cypherpunks. You can see they have some rebellious posters on the wall, dressed in your typical kind of tech worker counterculture kind of style. The cypherpunks are very concerned about privacy. And in 1993, one of the cypherpunks, Eric Hughes, wrote a privacy manifesto. And I just want to read to you the first few sentences of this, because this will give you some of the philosophy of these people who helped create cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. So privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age, but privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. So there's a very kind of nuanced view around the differences between certain types of privacy and secrecy, and the importance of privacy and the importance in an electronic world of privacy. And so many cypherpunks worked on projects like encryption technology for email, and some of them were also very interested in financial privacy. And so, like I said, almost 40 years ago, 39 years ago, David Chaum, who many consider to be the father of cryptocurrency, while he was at UC Berkeley, published a paper on anonymous electronic money, and actually had the privilege of meeting David Chaum for the first time a little over a year ago. He's still alive and very active. He's working on digital currency still, but he wrote a paper in 1982 that kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of really interesting experiments around electronic cash. In fact, he even launched a startup called DigiCash in the 1990s. And if you read some of the Wired magazine articles describing DigiCash in the 1990s, you could substitute the word Bitcoin in for DigiCash and would read very much like a description of Bitcoin today. I think one of the most important points about the history of blockchain technology is that it's been something that's been actively researched and developed for, like I said, 4 decades. And in fact, all of the technical components that were fastened together to make Bitcoin existed over 10 years before Bitcoin's invention. In fact, a lot of people have asked, why did it take so long for Bitcoin to be invented? Adam Back's proof of work algorithm was invented in 1997. Bitcoin didn't come to light until 2008. So 11 years later, the networking protocols, the distributed timestamp ledger, all these technical pieces that Satoshi Nakamoto, who we'll discuss here in a moment, the creator of Bitcoin, fastened together to create Bitcoin. All these technical pieces were there for 10 or more years prior to the invention of Bitcoin. So the problem that in computer science that Satoshi Nakamoto solved is referred to as the double spending problem. And it's basically, I think, can be illustrated in a very traditional way with like soda vending machines. Some of you may not be old enough like myself to remember these types of machines that you could put a coin in and attach, some people cleverly attach a string to the coin or something like this and be able to have the machine distribute a soda to them and retrieve their money and do this over and over again. And obviously, if you can do this to a vending machine, that's a big problem. The vending machine operator will go bankrupt. Same problem with digital currency. If you could double spend the same token, the digital file, if you could copy and reproduce it in the same way, it's very easy through torrenting protocols like BitTorrent to file share movies, music, etc. Then you're going to have a hard time maintaining value and credibility in that digital currency system. So that's a double spending problem. And Satoshi Nakamoto solved it through the introduction of a distributed timestamp ledger, which we refer to as the blockchain, with the proof of work algorithm and some very clever economic incentives, which we'll talk more about in part 2. But before we get into that, I just want to make a high-level point, a comparison between a blockchain-based system like Bitcoin and our traditional financial system. Traditionally, assets or currencies, US dollars, stock certificates, bonds, these are separate and distinct from the networks and ledgers on which they trade and are exchanged. So I can take my US dollars or my rupee and I can transfer them to Visa or MasterCard or whatever other payment channel. And so you can think of the assets as kind of like a train car, and Visa and Swift and stock exchanges is like the train tracks. And you can pick up your asset, let's use US dollars as an example, and I can put them on Visa's rails, or I can put them on MasterCard's rails, or I can put them on Swift's rails or Fedwire. The asset is separate from the rails, right? The assets are distinct. Whereas with Bitcoin in a blockchain system, the asset or the currency is integrated with the network and ledger. It's a fully integrated system. And this might seem like a limitation in some ways, and it is. It does create some limitations, but also enhances potentially security, trust minimization, programmability. There's some advantages gained by having that integrated system where the asset, the train car, you can think of Bitcoin as the train car, it cannot be removed from the blockchain, right? They are locked together. You cannot pick up the Bitcoin and go put them on another blockchain. They only live on the Bitcoin networks, ledger. Okay, so any questions at this point before we move on to section 2? Great. So how does Bitcoin and blockchain technology work? So the first problem we have when we're trying to explain this technology is this picture. This is a picture that often is used by the media, or a similar picture. The BBC uses it. And when all of us, even people who teach and lecture at Cambridge or the LSE, usually when we learn about new things, we do so through the media. So when the media has a hard time explaining something new like Bitcoin and blockchain technology, the general public, including the so-called experts, have a hard time understanding it. And this picture is a big problem because it shows a physical object. Bitcoin is not a physical coin. It's not like the coins or banknotes in your pocket, right? So you need to erase this image from your mind's eye as you're thinking about what the system looks like, and replace it with something more like this, which is a set of computers connected over the internet, running common software, and exchanging information to synchronize and record who owns what. All right, that's a better picture to keep in your mind when you think about what does Bitcoin look like. So the other point I wanted to make is that, we talked about distributed ledger technology, in the introduction. Blockchains kind of exist within this world of distributed databases, which are nothing new. Distributed databases have been around far longer than Bitcoin. And you can think about blockchains as a type of distributed database, just like a distributed ledger is a type of distributed database. And what makes these different has to do with permissions and who has access to read and write to the database. Blockchains are more open. They don't limit who can access them. So there's no restrictions on who can use Bitcoin. If you've got a computing device and an internet connection, you can have access to the Bitcoin blockchain. Whereas a distributed ledger system might be more restrictive. You may have heard about Facebook's plan to introduce a global currency, originally called Libra, later rebranded to be Diem. That would be less of a blockchain and more of a distributed ledger with a limited set of participants. About 100 companies were invited to be a part of the founding network, but maybe less than that actually. And originally, I think the intention was to grow it to 100. I think it may have started even with fewer than that, like 30. So I just wanted to highlight the difference between distributed ledgers and blockchains briefly. What is it like to use a blockchain system like Bitcoin? Well, it's a lot like email. You have the same 5 things. If you haven't ever used it, you need, of course, first a computing device and an internet connection, that basic kind of infrastructure. Second, you need an application, email client, or the equivalent would be a wallet. So blockchain.com makes a very popular crypto asset wallet used by millions of people. Third, you're going to need a message, something to say, and you need, fourth, an address. In both cases, there's an equivalent in the cryptocurrency space. The message, of course, would be the quantity of Bitcoin you wanted to say send. And the address is similar to an email address. It's a unique address that coins can be sent to or sent from. And then there's a fifth thing that both email and blockchain systems like Bitcoin need, and that's a password. If anyone could get into your email, they could impersonate you and create all sorts of problems. A cryptographic private key is what secures your crypto assets. That's your password, in essence, to make sure no one can steal or spend your Bitcoins. So there's some similarities with how Bitcoin works with email. And this is a very stylized, high-level depiction of kind of how a blockchain works, very simplified. But if you imagine 2 people wanting to transact and send some Bitcoin, before that transaction is received, it needs to be verified by our network of computers that are checking to make sure that this party is not trying to double spend the Bitcoin, that they actually have it, that's a bona fide legitimate transaction. And after that verification has been performed, it gets bundled together with other recent transactions into what we call a block. So the block is simply a bundle of transactions that are cryptographically chained to the previous block. And these can be numbered all the way back to the very first block, which was mined into existence on the 3rd of January 2009. So blockchain is a complete history, a complete ledger of all the transactions that have ever occurred in Bitcoin's history. All right. Now, these networks are not, invulnerable. You often hear things like they're tamper-proof. They're not tamper-proof. They're tamper-resistant. And they can be attacked if blockchain networks like Bitcoin's has 51% of the computing power attacking it, trying to double spend a transaction or censor transactions, then the attacker can be successful. The network depends on a majority of the computing power being what Satoshi Nakamoto referred to as honest, or I would say probably a better word is non-malicious. So not trying to undermine the network, basically. That's one of the inherent vulnerabilities in Bitcoin's design, is that it needs for the network to remain non-malicious. I want to compare Bitcoin with the internet because that's a comparison that's often made. Why do people do that? Part of the reason is because before the internet, if you wanted to launch a new telecommunications company, you needed to get the permission of the phone company. The phone company was the gatekeeper. If you wanted to, even call someone, you need to apply for a phone number and get approval. So you had this gatekeeper who stood in the way of you launching a telecommunications company or even communicating. After the internet, you don't need anyone's permission as long as you have a connection to the internet and a computing device. You can send information, you can create a startup, and we saw massive innovation unleashed with the launch of the internet. A lot of people see the same thing happening with blockchain technology, where before Bitcoin, you had banks as the gatekeeper. If you wanted to launch a fintech company, you needed to get permission of the bank to use their payment rails, or even to send value. Again, you have to apply for an account. But with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, you don't need anyone's permission. All you need is a computing device, internet connection, and you can start moving and receiving value, creating a fintech startup. So that's partly why we see this comparison between the innovation potential of cryptocurrency and the internet, and why many people think it would be a huge mistake for India to try to too tightly regulate cryptocurrency, because you'll move all the innovation which is happening in the cryptocurrency space offshore. You'll see more brain drain, more people coming to California from India and launching their startups here. And I think that would be, a tragedy for India and for other countries, not just India, that are thinking about regulating cryptocurrency too strongly. Places like California, New York, London have done really well. They've collected the lion's share of the fintech boom. It'd be nice to see some of that boom distributed more evenly across the world, but you need smart regulation and a pro-innovation, a culture for that to take place. So this is a big test for India. Sorry about that. So let's talk about beyond Bitcoin. What else exists beyond Bitcoin? Well, when you think about what a blockchain technology is, it's really replacing handshakes, the traditional kind of trust that often was reputation-based and dependent upon, informal agreements, with a rules-based software-enforced protocol that enforces trust algorithmically and helps drive cooperation in algorithmic fashion. So it's an automation in some ways of cooperation and a minimization of the need for human trust. And humans sometimes, lie or do things that are untrustworthy. And some people would rather place their trust in technology, in computer institutions rather than more traditional institutions. You see this, I think, in other areas like the rise of driverless cars and how terrible humans have historically been at protecting each other when we're behind the wheel of an automobile. And a lot of people are very anxious to move to a world of driverless cars where humans no longer have the power to make decisions over how to drive the vehicle and make mistakes like be intoxicated and get behind the wheel and so on and so forth. I thought Munib Ali, who's a co-founder of Blockstack, which is building a smart contract layer on top of Bitcoin. It's kind of like the Ethereum for Bitcoin, so to speak, had a nice thing about how blockchains can help us advance from a don't be evil world to a can't be evil world. So Google famously had this motto, "Don't be evil." And the joke is that, well, they have so much power, they have to remind themselves not to be evil because otherwise they might abuse their power. But wouldn't it be nice to live in a world where, no institution, no company has that much power that they have to tell themselves, don't be evil. They simply cannot be evil. The rules of the system don't allow that kind of evil behavior to take place. So the 5 key components of a blockchain: you have cryptography, you have a peer-to-peer network, a consensus algorithm, a ledger which keeps track of transactions and who owns what, and your validity rules. What are the rules that govern how a transaction is valid, and so on. I want to talk briefly about smart contracts. We're going to use a dog as an example. Imagine you're very busy, you're a dog owner, you hire a dog walker, but you don't trust the dog walker. So you put a GPS chip around the dog's neck. And every day when the dog comes home, that GPS chip syncs with the internet, and the smart contract, which is just an application that's running on top of a blockchain. You can think of the blockchain as like an operating system, and the smart contract's like an application on top of it. And that application, that smart contract, checks to see how far the dog walked, to see if it walked the agreed upon, steps or miles. And after that verification is performed, that's the first step. It would then execute a payment. So it verifies, that's step 1, what the smart contract can do in this case, and it makes a payment. That's the second step. And that's a brief introduction to smart contracts. I'm not sure any of you entrepreneurs listening should be launching a dog walking smart contract service, but flight insurance is quite interesting, I think, for smart contracts. When a flight is delayed or canceled, that's public information. You can imagine a smart contract querying flight databases, and if you had insurance, automatically getting paid if your flight was delayed or canceled. And also not having to trust that the insurance company would be solvent to make that payment, because the funds could exist on the blockchain rather than in the hands of the insurance company. So that's kind of an interesting kind of added benefit of smart contract. Not only does it automate the claims process and may speed up getting paid, it also helps reduce the trust you need in the insurance company to still be in existence and not run off with the money, because they don't actually technically hold it. It's locked up on a blockchain rather than sitting in the insurance company's bank account. Voting, I think, is a really interesting one. The United States just had a big election, lots of concerns around the accuracy of that election. People not able to verify their votes were counted. That undermines trust in the election. You could remain pseudonymous like you are with blockchains like Bitcoin and vote and check to make sure online that your vote was counted correctly without revealing who you are. That could be a real game changer, especially in countries around the world where there's a lot of election fraud, and where that leads to illegitimate governments who have to pay really high borrowing costs to borrow money on the public debt markets because the government isn't legitimate. It isn't backed by a fair election. Shipping containers, putting GPS on shipping containers. HSBC and other big banks are looking at this. Speeding up trade finance payments, and so on is a really interesting use case. I think land registry is also quite interesting. So there's been some work in economics done around all this capital that isn't officially recognized in places like Peru. The economist Hernando de Soto has written about this. If you could give people title to the land they're living on, they could use that asset to access the financial system to begin to develop credit, access loans, savings products, and so on. And blockchain could be a really interesting way to do that. And also create a system that is more resistant to, say, tampering than existing kind of centralized land registry systems where a new government comes in and they can simply lose a file or overwrite the existing or old government's view of who owns what. So in areas where there's bad regimes, this could be quite helpful. Notarization, another one that could be interesting. I'll just give one other example, smart escrow. This was kind of a funny example from the Bitcoin world, where basically somebody wanted to buy Bitcoin and they sent them, I think, US dollars, and they never received the Bitcoin. And I thought it was really kind of interesting that here was this cryptocurrency transaction that could have easily used a smart contract to prevent this from happening by using what you could call smart escrow. And so instead of sending the US dollars to a bank and then waiting for the Bitcoin to show up, you could write a smart contract application to say, okay, I'm going to send my US dollars to the smart contract in the form of a US dollar backed stablecoin. It's a type of cryptocurrency that has US dollars that are pegged to it and held in reserve that can be converted for the stablecoin crypto unit. And so the stablecoin is in the smart contract, and the smart contract's watching a pre-designated Bitcoin address to see that a certain amount of Bitcoin are sent to it. And once those Bitcoin arrive at the purchaser's Bitcoin address, the smart contract would then release the US dollar stablecoins to the seller of the Bitcoin. And you know, it's kind of like this kind of independent escrow service where you reduce the need for trust in a traditional third party, and you reduce any kind of concern that you're not going to get paid, as was the case in this example. I think it was in the UK this happened in 2019. We're running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to try to skip ahead a little bit. Sorry, I do want to talk briefly about decentralized autonomous organizations. These are quite interesting because they're starting to get more and more attention. They've been around for a number of years. There's been some high profile hacks and issues with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. But a famous example that was actually compromised operated similar to Kickstarter or kind of a venture capital firm, where again, this is a smart contract. A DAO is kind of like just an application, a smart contract that lives on a blockchain that you can send cryptocurrency to hold in the application itself. And once you contribute capital to the DAO, you can vote in proportion to your share of capital contributed on, say, projects to fund that have been submitted to the DAO, to this application for consideration for funding. And then funds can be allocated, and you could even get a stake in some of those projects. So it's a way to kind of basically take what traditionally needed like a team and bank accounts and websites and all these things, and really kind of create an organization that can coordinate work and fund work and have no people, just be a complete software application. This is quite extraordinary. And I think we're in the early days of seeing how DAOs can function and how sophisticated they can be. There still continue to be a lot of security risks on some of these bleeding edge smart contract areas. But it's a very interesting, I think, example of how traditional organizations can be replaced with software. I want to talk about what sectors of the economy might be heavily impacted by blockchain technology. One simple way to kind of make an estimate of where we're going to see the most impact is simply to count the number of use cases that have been developed across different sectors of the economy. And we saw that banking and finance seem to be receiving the most attention. The government, interestingly, is also getting a lot of attention. So things like central bank digital currency, or what we're going to talk about here in a second, food supply chain. So before we get to that case study in the UK, though, let me briefly talk about some myths, because there's a lot of hype around blockchain technology, and I feel like this presentation is probably hyping it a bit as well. But let me break down some of the myths, you know, that you'll often hear. You'll sometimes hear blockchains described as trustless. They don't require trust. That's not true at all. They always require some trust. If nothing else, you're trusting in the underlying cryptography that secures the chains, which cannot be mathematically proven to be secure. We only think it's secure because it hasn't been cracked yet. So there's a bit of faith in that cryptography. That's important to keep in mind when you're thinking about especially investing in crypto assets. Blockchains are immutable or tamper-proof. That's completely untrue. They're tamper-resistant, but we have seen examples where history has been unwound, meaning they were changeable. The community can get together and reverse history, and that happened actually with that DAO hack on the Ethereum blockchain back in 2016. talked about how blockchains are vulnerable to 51% attacks. They need non-malicious computing power to be the majority, so they're not 100% secure. Nor are they truth machines. You know, it's a database. If garbage goes into the database, garbage will come out. Okay, so let's talk about the UK food supply chain pilot study around around blockchain technology. Food supply chains are getting a lot of focus. So kind of wanting to track, you know, as this catchy expression said, food from farm to fork, so that consumers of food can know everywhere the food has been in the life cycle. You'd have more transparency, arguably, if you use the blockchain, more safety and quality control with real-time access to data, more traceability. Consumers can actually see where it's been, and you might even increase revenue because you know, people have more confidence in the food. These are some of the arguments for why I use blockchain with a food supply chain. And so the UK Food Standards Agency, which is a government organization that coordinates food safety policy in the UK, has been trialing blockchain technology in the food supply chain there. And you know, the basic, you know, questions you want to ask yourself if you're thinking about, you know, using a blockchain are, do you have a network of participants who you want to coordinate some activity around? Yes. You have consumers, farmer, veterinarians, slaughterhouses, groceries, and government. So you've got a number of different network participants with different interests. That's an important thing. And they may not have alignment in terms of all their incentives and priorities. So you know, that test is met. The second test is, there is some kind of need for consensus. Yes. In this case, there can be disagreements over records, disputes about what facts occurred, and so on. Is there a need for transparency? Of course. There's been, you know, illnesses in the food supply chains. You need to access what actually happened to get to the bottom of those outbreaks. You need tamper resistance, because that's going to help with food supply chain credibility and also its safety. And trust minimization is also important because, you know, again, you want accurate and full data recorded in the system. So what did we learn after we looked at this study of blockchain in the food supply chain? Well, the first problem, you know, that came up is whenever you're dealing with a physical, you know, entity like a pig or a cow or, you know, an animal, which is what the food supply chain studies were focused on in the UK initially, you have to figure out how to take something that's not digitally native and, you know, enter it onto the blockchain. And there can be data entry issues. And we talked about earlier, garbage in, garbage out. Your system is only as good as the accuracy of the data. So that's one problem. You know, with Bitcoin, it's digitally native. It only lives on the blockchain. So you don't have this kind of data entry issue. So, you know, that trust issue is something maybe you can, you know, develop some clever solutions around. You know, people have talked about uploading DNA samples of animals to the blockchain, or, you know, I learned something interesting about cheese. Apparently, cheese can have almost a unique DNA fingerprint. And so you can imagine cheese coming over from France to England, and you check once it crosses the channel, whether the cheese that was sampled in Calais and arrives in Dover is the same cheese. That seems a bit extreme in some cases, but there are some kind of clever approaches to trying to get data accuracy into blockchains. The bigger problem I felt, though, was the governance issue in the UK's case. There hadn't been enough work done up front on figuring out who was going to run the system and how it would be managed. You had all these different stakeholders: consumers, government, slaughterhouses, vets, farmers. But, you know, who was in charge, and you know, and how is this going to be run? And so I think, you know, not thinking about governance up front was actually an oversight in the UK pilot studies. But having said that, you know, with these two problems, data entry and governance, there's still, I think, a huge an interesting opportunity around food supply chain because the cost is so high. When you have an outbreak of a disease in the food supply chain, people die. And anything, even if it's imperfect, that can come in and increase transparency and data record keeping and trust minimization to some degree at least might be a step in the right direction. But these were two kind of the big issues that I flagged in that particular use case. And I think that work is still ongoing. So one point I think that Gideon Greenspan, who's the founder of a distributed ledger technology consulting firm, makes about avoiding pointless blockchain and making sure that your blockchain project has a legitimate need for a blockchain and doesn't just need a more traditional distributed database, is you want to make sure that there's multiple blockchain nodes, multiple parties involved, where more than one of these parties is generating real transactions and participating in the blockchain's consensus algorithm. Without these characteristics, blockchain is providing literal no value compared to a centralized database. And I think that quote from Gideon, I think, captures why there's been a big gap between the hype of blockchain technology outside of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which have been very successful. But we saw corporations and Wall Street, healthcare, a lot of industries get really interested in blockchain in 2015, as there was a lot of excitement around Bitcoin. And what they, I think, failed to appreciate is that oftentimes a more traditional distributed database is perfectly fine for a given use case. You don't need to actually use a blockchain. And so there's been, I think, a failure to fully realize and capitalize on all the hype around blockchain technology and DLT in particular in the corporate space. Whereas with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, we've seen a lot more, kind of success. All right, so looking ahead, blockchain technology, I think, is going to be here to stay. It's a way to kind of coordinate work, like we talked about. It's a process improvement technology. It reminds some people, like The Economist, who wrote about this, is something like double entry bookkeeping or joint stock companies. It's a cornerstone for advancing economic development. And you have this kind of interesting tailwind also that's fueling blockchain technology. You have the whole ongoing digitization of the world. Software is eating the world, as Mark Andreessen famously put it. But you also have the rise of just peer-to-peer economic activity. So, ride sharing, Uber, and Airbnb. These things were all happening kind of alongside the rise of peer-to-peer currency networks like Bitcoin. And so there's this kind of just ongoing peer-to-peer networking effect that's happening that central bankers are very well aware of, including Governor Carney, who really liked to go to music festivals while he was in the UK. There he is drinking a beer and having a burger, real man of the people, Governor Carney. So the other thing I would say about blockchain technology that makes its success, I think, or its future pretty secure is, rising powers like China have identified it as a key national strategic priority, one of the top priorities, and are throwing just a ton of resources at it. And of course, countries that are, in a kind of quasi-competitive dance with China, like the United States, like India, I think really want to make sure they're not falling behind countries like China and others that are prioritizing blockchain at such a high level. The Chinese are leading the race to launch a national digital currency. It's something that I think that surprised a lot of people, because many people thought that a smaller country would be first to launch an experiment with national digital currency, but instead it's China, one of the largest economies, soon probably to be the largest, still trails the United States for now. Actually out in front, and maybe the first country to launch a national digital currency. A little scary because that's a very big step. And there's definitely some potential knock-on effects around financial stability and cybersecurity and so on that you want to make sure you get right before you widely launch something like a national central bank digital currency. But if you want to keep up with China, you better have a good national blockchain strategy. And then, of course, you have the private sector. We mentioned Facebook earlier. When Facebook actually launched or announced Libra, they still haven't launched it in June of 2019, almost 2 years ago. supposedly that's what really set in motion and expedited China's work on a central bank digital currency. They were worried that a Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp powered currency could overwhelm any effort by China to deploy its digital renminbi and gain market share in key markets like Africa and elsewhere. But this project has been kind of slowed down due to regulatory concerns, competitive and privacy concerns. But what it did also, along with what China's doing, is I think validate that blockchain technology is really ready for billions of users. Right now or before this, Bitcoin was maybe used by 10, 20, 30 million people. We think maybe 100 million people today own Bitcoin. And clearly, I think major corporations, major countries like China, think blockchain technology is ready for billions of people and is ready for prime time. So when we come back to Bitcoin, just to wrap up here and think about what the future holds, it's a much more complicated picture because of this interplay between economics, technology, and policy. We have a very right now conducive macroeconomic environment that's propelling Bitcoin's price higher. It's gone up tremendously in the last 12 months, I think like 6 or 7-fold. Continues to be very volatile, but the macro environment concerns about debt and too much stimulus and whatnot are really driving interest in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And at the same time, and someone just asked about why India is thinking about banning Bitcoin. The policy environment, obviously, and the regulatory environment has a huge effect on what's going to happen to Bitcoin as well. So, if countries like India try to ban Bitcoin, and others have banned Bitcoin or have tried to, Bolivia's had it banned for years, for example, in Latin America. It's not a very successful ban in Bolivia's case, and I don't think it would be very successful in India's case either, and we could maybe talk more about that, why that's going to be difficult. But that will slow down, certainly, the adoption of Bitcoin. And part of the reason I think that India is thinking about wanting to ban Bitcoin is India traditionally or historically has engaged in significant regulation around financial flows, both in and out of the country. So capital controls is a term that you might hear to describe that kind of restriction on flows of money across borders. Financial repression, which is one of the subjects of my PhD, is another term you'll use to hear what countries like not just India, but China and others use to control heavily financial activity. And there's a worry, I think, among some folks in India and other countries that Bitcoin is kind of like the US dollar. It's a competitive currency that could destabilize the domestic economy. And certainly, there's an element of truth to that. It gives people an option to kind of protest, say, current monetary policy or fiscal policy and decide to own something else. If they decide they don't trust the banking system, they can choose a crypto asset now instead. That's a choice that didn't exist 12 years ago. So that scares some policymakers, and I understand the reasons for that concern. It's a legitimate concern, but I think India and every country for that matter really has a lot more to lose by trying to ban crypto assets, which are here to stay in my view, and actually has much more to gain by trying to embrace them. If you embrace them, you'll make India a leading country in the blockchain space. You'll continue to attract talent, keep your great talent in India rather than seeing it flee to California to build crypto asset startups. You'll see capital invested and flowing into India. There's just a lot of, I think, benefits, a lot more benefits. And it's really hard to ban cryptocurrency. Like I said, if you have a computer and an internet connection, you can access Bitcoin and crypto assets. And people do that in Bolivia and other countries where it's currently banned pretty easily. So I think, as we look ahead, one of the big things that has not happened yet is people starting to get paid in cryptocurrency. That's, I think, a barrier to it being used as a actual currency. That's why I think the term crypto asset and Bitcoin is often compared to digital. It's called digital gold compared to gold. It's more an investment asset today than a currency. I think that's where a lot of the confusion arises. And that's another reason why I think India shouldn't be so worried about Bitcoin, because India has lived very comfortably for centuries, millennia, with gold being very popular in India. India is one of the major gold markets, and Bitcoin really today is largely digital gold. And so I think Indians have learned to live very comfortably with gold as a competitor to the rupee and as another asset that people can own. Bitcoin is just another version of gold, a digital version of that. So I don't see honestly why it would be any more destabilizing than allowing gold ownership in India. But until people can start to get paid in a crypto asset, and I think it's more likely they'll get paid in something more stable than Bitcoin, although some people are seeking to get paid in Bitcoin. It's going to be hard for Bitcoin or any crypto asset to gain traction as a currency for buying, say, a cup of coffee or something of that nature. You need people to start getting this as their salary to use it in everyday payments. Where I think you could see, I think, some interesting payment activity is in the machine-to-machine economy, because already today you've got millions of machines that are getting paid for their work in cryptocurrency. And those are the computers, when we go back to that picture I showed you of what you should keep in your mind's eye when you think about what does a cryptocurrency or blockchain look like, those computers that are processing transactions and running the Bitcoin network, they get paid for that work in Bitcoin. And you're starting to see decentralized file storage and decentralized computing, like decentralized versions of Amazon Web Services pop up in the blockchain space. And the coin of the realm in those applications is their native currencies, and that's what you need to pay with to use those services. So just like when I go to Europe, I need to use the euro. If I want something from the machine-to-machine economy, I'm going to have to use their coin of the realm, and that coin looks like it's going to be cryptocurrency. So that's how you could start to see more use of crypto as a currency and less as a just speculative investment asset. And that may have some really interesting effects on how it's used for payments going forward. Question came in your opinion, will the invention of quantum computing shake the underlying cryptographic protocols and hence the robustness of blockchains? So this is one of those kind of existential threats to blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, the idea that the cryptography could be cracked. We talked about how earlier the cryptography is not, you can't prove that it's mathematically prove that it's secure. We only think it's secure because it hasn't been cracked yet. And the longer it remains secure and the more value it is securing, so if you multiply time secure with value being secured, the bigger that number is, the more confident you can be in the system's security. But there is this kind of arms race going on with quantum resistant cryptography and quantum computing. And some parts of Bitcoin are already quantum resistant. Other parts, in theory, should be crackable with the rise of quantum computing. When I talk to quantum computer scientists about this issue, I'm not a quantum expert myself. It sounds like this is still a ways off, years at least. And further, there is ways to swap into the Bitcoin protocol quantum resistant cryptography. The other thing I would say that I would bet on is the world has a much greater incentive, putting even just forget cryptocurrency, think about our traditional financial system and everything else that depends on security and quantum resistant technology. There's so much need for resistance to cyber attacks that I think a lot more resources are going to be going into security than into attacks. You're going to continue to see national intelligence services, of course, trying to crack cryptography, but the world is so dependent now on cybersecurity that I think you're going to see a lot more resources invested in hardening systems to be quantum resistant. That will help kind of security stay ahead of the attackers, but it is a risk factor. It's not something that can be ignored. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think gold is going away. As much as Bitcoin is really, replacing gold in some ways as the new ultimate reserve asset, the ultimate hard asset, it is still a virtual asset. It's still, just basically, software. And it's going to be always vulnerable to a cyber attack in a way that a physical object like gold is not. And that's one of gold's kind of killer apps. It's resilient to cyber attacks in a way Bitcoin isn't. So gold is probably not doomed yet. So just to wrap up, I mean, the big idea, I think, and why this topic is so disruptive is this whole concept of decentralization is so radical. It's a term that's often, I think, overhyped. It's a spectrum. It's not a binary thing where you're either decentralized or centralized. You're usually somewhere on a spectrum. And it really challenges the way that societies have functioned for centuries. And we're used to institutions and hierarchies. And when we think about decentralizing money or decentralizing services, it really challenges us to think about an entirely different way of living and operating. But I find it very exciting. It's a fascinating subject as a researcher. And I think it's also very empowering and potentially very positive. But it will be disruptive. It will need smart regulation. And it hopefully will have the support of India and other great countries around the world as we all go on this journey to understand where decentralized technologies like blockchain technology will take us. So that's all I have for you. I want to thank you all very much for listening. And if there's time, I'm happy to take any questions. Okay, I think there are no more questions, so I will sign off and let you get on to the next agenda item. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable talk on cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, distributed ledger, Bitcoin, smart contract, decentralized autonomous organization, and case study about UK food supply chain.
Garrick, can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Yeah, you told that you were basically an economist and you had some technology background, so you were working on this kind of thing. So reversing this role, our students are computer science students. If they want to work in the intersection of economics and computer science, what background they need, or what kind of things can we have a course that can be designed around this intersection?
It's a great question. And I don't think we have a lot of programs that are really as multidisciplinary as they should be to give you, a full spectrum of exposure to, not just economics and computer science, but, regulation and law is a big part of this. And there's also all sorts of interesting sociology questions, philosophical questions even. And I think one of the most exciting things about working in the industry as I'm doing now, I still have, the affiliation with academia, but I'm primarily in industry, is by working directly in the blockchain technology space, you really do get exposure, multidisciplinary exposure as a builder to all these different disciplines in a way when you're in your academic silo, it's a little harder to do. And I know this from watching the turf wars in academia, where the finance department will claim that cryptocurrencies are their turf, and the information systems department will say, no, this is our turf. And the legal department would say, well, we're smart contracts because those are contracts. And you get all this fighting going on because it's a hot area and there's some funding and publication opportunities. And it's just it's unfortunate that academic institutions can be a bit too zero sum in my view. Whereas in the industry, space, you're just really interested in building, and you kind of learn by doing. So you've had a lot of engineers, computer scientists become very smart about economics. And you've also seen some economists, although I think the economists are moving a little slower in all honesty, to become a bit more tech savvy. And that's an exciting thing to see. But I think that's happening a lot more in the actual industry than it is in academia.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Garrick.
You're welcome.
I would request you all to switch on your camera for a group snapshot.
Garrick, can you also switch on your video?
Thank you, dear participants. I request the participants to fill the attendance and feedback through the link which was shared in the chat box. Now we'll break for the session.